Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give it just a few seconds for people to file in before we get started. We do have a lot that we're excited to discuss with our panelists, so we want to make sure that we're making good use of our time today. I will kick us off with some housekeeping, but while I do that, take a moment to find the Q&A box and let us know where in the country you're joining us from and what is the biggest challenge or question you're facing as you are navigating through this reopening phase that many of our schools and other programs are in. So where you're located and a challenge you are facing around reopening. Okay, so like I said, a bit of housekeeping. If you aren't able to attend the full webinar or you just want to rewatch or share with others later, we will be recording. Everyone who is registered will also receive a follow-up email with the recording within about 24 hours. That email will also include a certificate of attendance and any other resources that are referenced in this webinar. There is also a Q&A box open to you. If you have a question for the organizers or the panelists, feel free to use that box. We will be keeping an eye on that box. For those of you who might be new to Teachstone, our mission is really about helping every child reach their full potential. And we do that by observing and measuring the interactions between teacher and child, and then working with teachers, with coaches, with administrators to help them improve on those interactions with their children. So far, we've fulfilled that mission with educators in all 50 states and around the globe. But we know there are so many more places and ways that we can spread this, right? So we're always excited to have conversations like the one that we're having today. And with that, I will pass the conversation over to our Vice President of Policy and Partnership Development, Amanda Alexander. Before Teachstone, Amanda was the Deputy Chancellor for DC Public Schools, and so she and of course all of our panelists today are uniquely qualified to speak with us today. So thank you, Amanda, for taking the time, and I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Gloria, and welcome everyone to this discussion here at Teachstone. I have the pleasure of being joined by Cynthia Robinson Rivers and Paula Polito, and I'd love to tell you a little bit about each of them before we begin. Paula Polito is the owner and director of Berry Tree Child Development Center in New Orleans. Paula has been at this work since 1999, and she's been running a 5-star high-quality childcare center in Louisiana. She's been in this business for quite a while, as I've said, and her advocacy work is something that I and many of my colleagues at Teachstone have admired for quite some time. She has served as advisory board chair for the Louisiana Department of Education. This is a commission member for the Louisiana Early Childhood and Early Care Commission, on the core leadership team for the Jefferson Parish Early Childhood Collaborative, and education chair for the Jefferson Chamber of Education. Most recently, she has been asked to serve on the Governor's Resiliency Task Force. And this task force is charged with creating a roadmap for Louisiana to navigate through the COVID pandemic. Thanks for joining us, Paula. Our second panelist is a former colleague of mine, Cynthia Robinson Rivers. Cynthia is the founding head of school at Van Ness Elementary School in Washington, D.C. While at Van Ness, she's assembled an award-winning team of teachers who have successfully implemented a socio-emotional learning approach and also a rigorous academic program with outstanding results. Cynthia began her career as an early childhood teacher. She was very instrumental in leading the district's LIFT initiative, which is a leadership initiative for teachers designed to create a career ladder for teachers. She also was instrumental in the district's impact teacher evaluation program, serving as a master educator, which is an individual who would observe teachers. Cynthia holds a BA in communications and art from Stanford, an MA from George Washington University, and an additional master's from Georgetown University. She's also a fellow with the first class of the Aspen Pahara Teacher Leadership Fellowship, and she's a recipient of the district's prestigious Rubenstein Award for highly effective leadership. Both of these women are exceptionally well credentialed and so qualified to engage in this conversation with me. And so, again, I thank you for being here. We're going to start with some questions. And to those of you who are joining us live, at the end of these questions, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So please take note and get ready to join afterwards. The first question to both you, Cynthia and Paula, is what are you noticing about students as they come back to school? What do you see as their not only instructional needs, but also their social emotional needs?
Sure, I'll start. I would say what we're seeing is a profound difference in the student experience and how students are presenting, depending on a number of factors in their lives. Those factors include their family background, the physical environment in which they're engaging in distance learning, the ability of their parents to support distance learning versus parents who are working and aren't able to support. And then their personalities, the extent to which they are independent and comfortable being autonomous, the extent to which they are introverted or extroverted. All of those factors lead our students to either be, in some cases, progressing quite nicely and thriving during distance learning. And in other cases, unfortunately, we have students whose gaps are widening and who we can see acute mental health needs developing during this time so long away from school. And so that's led us to really need to differentiate our supports to the families and have a robust and very serious focus on mitigating against the exacerbation of inequity that we see developing. I'm glad to share that DCPS has now invited some students back to the classroom, and we have 190 of our 375 students who are coming in person. And the aim is to get as many of those students who have not been thriving in distance learning in person so that we can meet their needs that way.
Thank you. And Paula, would you like to share some thoughts on that question?
Absolutely. And so our students are primarily students birth to age 4. And what we saw initially from bringing our students back in person was the sheer joy of having their peers next to them. Children were skipping into school, smiles as wide as their faces. They were so excited to be back in person with their colleagues. So we've seen truly in need of emotional support with our little ones. Again, that birth to 4, they truly need that positive climate. They need a ton of teacher sensitivity at this point. And so that's what our teachers' focus has been since we reopened our center on June 1st. So a lot of that overall emotional support.
Thank you. And how would you say you're responding to the needs of students and their families? You began to talk a lot about that. What has your response been? And I'm curious also if, you have structured the day differently to respond to the needs of students. What has changed in terms of the structure of the day for students and their experience?
So it's been very clear that our parents do need a lot of support right now. We've seen anxiety amongst parents present itself in a myriad of ways. I have had parents just cry in front of me. I've had parents that just needed a hug. They're just extremely anxious, wanting to do what's best for their child, yet still making sure that safety is at the, most important piece. So we've been a little looser in regards to our day, not quite as structured, even though children do thrive on consistency and structure. It is apparent, yet we've been a little more flexible where need be. Of course, put in a ton of measures to mitigate risk with the help of Louisiana Department of Education, as well as the Department of Health and Hospitals. So static groups, not eating in cafeterias, just any ways for us to mitigate risk and prioritize the health and safety of both our teachers as well as our students.
Great. And Cynthia, did you have something to add to that? I know some of your students are still in a virtual setting, but have you rethought how that day, that experience is structured to tend to the social emotional needs of students.
Yeah, it's been a huge focus area for us. We were a school that prided ourselves in being attentive to the needs of the whole child, not just their academic or cognitive development before the pandemic. And so our teachers and my coach, my AP, all of us have tried to be really intentional about how to shift that approach or keep that approach even in a virtual setting. When it comes to the structure of the day, we keep a couple of things in mind. They're super sedentary right now, and that's not healthy. We need to get them up and moving. It's good for their physical well-being, and it's also good for their brain functioning. And so we ask the teachers to explicitly and systematically in the school day
I think I'm losing you a little, Cynthia. I think
times for
we're having some trouble with Cynthia's audio. Cynthia, if you would mind pausing for a second. Yes, the audio isn't working for Cynthia. Paula, let's go back to you while we see if we can address that. Let's turn our attention to teachers. We talked a little bit about what we noticed in terms of kids and how they are showing up. We talked about their needs, the needs of their parents. What are the needs of the adults in your center that are serving these children as best as they can?
Great question, Amanda. And as Teachstone often refers to parallel processes, we see that ever so clearly in this instance. Our teachers need an incredible amount of teacher sensitivity right now. You know, they are feeling so anxious, so overwhelmed. Are they truly safe? Are they going to be okay? Most of the childcare field is made up of teachers who are a little bit older, those high-risk individuals who, as an owner, I was very concerned about their health and safety. I did not want to put them in any dangerous situation. So again, after those conversations with the Department of Health and Hospitals, knowing that when our teachers masked and we were able to put other mitigation efforts in place, that they would in fact be safe. And because of that, and a lot of hand-holding, a lot of sensitivity on the part of our administrative team, myself, my director, my assistant director, we've been able to successfully open. But we are well aware that if our teachers don't feel safe and taken care of, that they cannot then provide a safe environment for our children, one that has that positive climate. So that's been a lot of work on our admin team, is to really take those teachers into our arms and hold them and let them know that they're going to be okay.
Great, thank you. And Cynthia, do we have you back at this time? Cynthia? Okay, doesn't seem like it, Paula. We're going to continue with you.
Okay.
And hopefully Cynthia will be able to chime in soon. I'm curious about your leadership. You know, this challenge has called upon everyone to flex new muscles in the leadership space and think creatively about how, you know, we respond to the pandemic on so many dimensions, not only with the children and the adults that I said, but a host of others. How has your leadership, you believe, evolved as a result of this pandemic, and what are you doing differently?
You know, these things are only making us stronger, Amanda. If I can go back to 2005, our center was really affected by Hurricane Katrina. Houses were on the ground. One of my buildings was actually on the ground. And I thought, wow, I don't think I could ever do another Hurricane Katrina. Well, now COVID has presented itself, and I must say, this one has been even more difficult because it constantly changes, sometimes day to day. So I think many leaders, and we've seen so many incredible individuals step up, right, and pivot in these times. And I think those people who are most adaptable right now and can move quickly and pivot when they need to are those people who have been able to be successful. It is so scary, the sheer uncertainty of what is going to happen. And for a small business like many childcare centers who might be on the call today, you know, are we going to be able to open our doors tomorrow? How will we be able to open our doors tomorrow? So I found what I have done, what I leaned into as an administrator was mostly the experts who, in this instance, were the epidemiologists, the medical field. Tell me more. When I got the okay, it is safe to reopen when you have put these mitigation methods in place, then I felt confident enough to do so. Knowing that what occurred on June 1 when I opened my doors for 225 families was probably nothing that I had ever done in the past 25 years of operating in business. I was very anxious and took a lot of deep breaths, I might say, just to really try to get me through the day and whatever challenge might be, you know, coming our way, because you just didn't know. And it's very difficult when you do own a business and you take things as personal as I do. You want it to run smoothly. You want everyone safe. You want, you know, the children's needs met. So it's been a little difficult, but we've been able to do it. We're persevering type of people down here in the South, and I've got a great administration team who has supported all of my efforts.
You definitely put that MBA to good use.
And in the midst of the pandemic, doctoral student, I'm working on my PhD in urban studies, which has lent itself, when we talk about leadership, you know, it's just been a beautiful sort of pairing right now, and really allowed a lot of deep thought. So it's been nice, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. And my last question before we open it up to the participants is around what you believe external stakeholders and policymakers need to know now what's happening on the ground in child care centers and for children.
You know, this opportunity, and I want to look at it as an opportunity, has been for the early childhood education field to really highlight our voices. If it has not been present in the past, it surely is present now, that childcare is truly the backbone of all other industries. And so I think our legislators, our representatives are aware of that. And this is the time for our industry to raise our voices to say, we need funding, we need help. Birth to 4, 90% of brain development occurs. We really need to capitalize on this opportunity. And I think this is the time to do it. Louisiana has done again, a myriad of things to help these child care centers by the way of grants and different types of funding. And that means a lot to small businesses who can then begin to prioritize their families, to pay their teachers a living wage, you know, things we weren't able to do before because the funding has never necessarily backed the words that may have, you know, presented itself. So I look at this as truly an opportunity for advocacy on behalf of our youngest learners.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Amanda, we have Cynthia. She's back on, but she's just going to be mic only.
Great. So Cynthia, maybe we can go back and have you respond to a few of the questions that Paula responded to. I think when we left off, we were discussing how you're responding to the needs of students and their families. Would you like to pick up there, please?
Sure. And towards the beginning of the pandemic, just about every way in which we were responding to our families' needs had nothing to do with their academics or their education. It was meeting very basic fundamental needs of families. Grocery gift cards, food deliveries, technology support. And that was what our families needed. And so our focus, February, March, and April last year was on those things. At this point, with the support of our district, who have been quite generous with technology, with hotspots, with meal provision, we are able to now focus on academics and structure our day in such a way that we can meet the needs of the whole child, not just their cognitive development. So I was sharing before when my audio was starting to mess up about how we incorporate movement breaks, both structured and unstructured, throughout the day. We have a morning routine that for the first half an hour, we have a series of community building and connecting activities that help get kids into their executive functioning state, ready to learn. We don't see that attention to socio-emotional learning as taking away from academic time, but actually as an important precursor to it. And then lastly, in terms of staffing, we've added an additional person to every classroom. So even, our second grade room that might have had 20 kids and one teacher, we've used behavior techs, teaching assistants from other schools, long-term subs, so that we're reducing ratios in all of our classrooms. And there's a second person to both do outreach to families if kids haven't logged in, to enable small groups and one-to-one conferences, and most importantly, to get at teacher wellness and teacher self-care, so that there's always someone to support the teacher if he or she needs to take a break, which, like Paula said, is something so critical during this very stressful time for teachers.
Thank you. The next question that we would love to have you respond to is around you and your leadership. I would love to hear how you believe your leadership has evolved. What are you doing differently as a leader now that you weren't doing previously? And even if there was a silver lining in all of it for you as a leader.
Yeah, I can speak to two ways. I have always been very urgent around academic achievement, and I've always been very committed to student-facing whole child approaches. What I probably have neglected in the past is attending to my teachers and their needs as much as I attend to my students and families. And so we have a huge teacher wellness initiative this year. We've partnered with an organization that allows for clinical therapy weekly for the teachers. That structure I just described allows them to have frequent breaks throughout the day. And for me, I'm committing to the challenge of honoring this even as we move into spring testing time, when all the outside pressures around academic progress come into play, and it can be easy to forget about the importance of taking care of your teachers. Secondly, another silver lining is our teachers have had to been really scrappy and really resourceful around online learning programs and platforms. And so they are now using Nearpod, Seesaw, Desmos, Flipgrid as ways to get student work samples in a way that you would have gotten in the past by circulating and having physical work samples. They're using Jamboard and Padlet and ways for kids to collaborate and get their thinking available to all in a learning session. And those are things we didn't use very much at all when we were in person, but that absolutely would be useful post-pandemic. And I see the creation of those kind of platforms and resources and the uptick in teachers using it as a real benefit of this pandemic that we hope to continue to utilize moving forward.
Great, thank you. And then the last question that I asked was around what you need external stakeholders to know and what you possibly need from them. What is it that folks on the outside need to know about what is happening inside the walls of schools?
Well, I think my school and just about every school whose leader I've spoken with the past year has had quite a bit of what they call mission creep, where we've moved away from our primary responsibility of educating kids and are taking care of all kind of other social agencies' areas of responsibility as well. We see that need, we see it going unmet, and so we are meeting it, but really we shouldn't be. And so if I were a policymaker, I would focus on interagency partnership development so that agencies that have expertise in some of these areas can fill that need or partner with us in filling that need. And some of the burden can come off of educators in terms of fundamental needs of families and shift back to focusing on educating kids. I would say, secondly, I'm a longtime supporter of having policymakers understand the value of mental health and socio-emotional learning and staffing and funding schools appropriately for it. So I am in the middle of budgeting right now, and I want a full-time psychologist, a full-time social worker, and 2 behavior techs who can proactively run groups with kids, and those positions are really expensive. And so when you understand the intrinsic value of people in the building who can support our students and the value and connection to that with their academic development, then you can know that you have to prioritize supporting it financially, because it's expensive, but it's needed. And I attribute both the culture that we have and our academic results to being able, through both local funding and grant funding, to being able to staff my school the way that I have.
Great. You put it out there what your staffing needs are in the midst of the budget season. So I hope those in a position of authority have heard your cry. But I definitely agree with both of you that ultimately this work requires that we have people at all levels in our schools and in our centers, just the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to serve children well. So thank you. I'm going to now allow our guests, I see we have about 500 people on today, ask their questions of our panelists. Are there any questions out there?
Hold on, give me a second. Liz, do you mind popping on? I can't find my Q&A box.
I've got a good one from Marietta. This says, with so much uncertainty, how can we begin to prepare so that we can stay ahead of the game? We are virtual now. I wish there was a mindfulness checklist to keep us on track when we return. Any sort of things to keep in mind before they head back, things to stay ahead of the game?
Well, I'll take it from a birth to 4 perspective. Again, I think we can't begin to think about instructional support until we have a very strong emotionally supportive environment. And I think that's what we're working on now. I think we have climbed mountains over this COVID pandemic that we've not climbed before. And I think when we get back, and part of that governor's resiliency task force is to build it back better. So how are we going to do that? I think when we come back, and this is sort of behind us, we are coming back better because we have built such a strong emotionally supportive environment amidst the struggles we've been through. I'll let Cynthia speak to sort of that elementary group, but that's from the birth to 4 perspective.
Yeah, I don't know if it's too specific, but we've come up with a classroom level checklist that we think is important to keep in mind before inviting students back. It includes having predictable routines and using explicit and clear language, having visuals to support everything you're asking students to do, building in time for community building and relationship building before you move into strictly academics. And having a structure that supports each of those. And so, leading into coming back in person, for example, our teachers created a social story, like a visual book with pictures and words that describe what kids should expect to ease the anxiety and the tension of the unknown of coming back to school. We do one of those social stories for how to go to the bathroom, how to go to recess, how to eat lunch, and especially for the youngest learners, those kinds of visual supports are really important. And that's an example of a structure that we would match with that checklist of things that we would keep in mind as we move into opening a classroom. As a school leader, on my checklist, of course, is figuring out ways to deliver really high impact, high leverage instructional strategies with the understanding that so many of our students are coming back behind. And so I would add to my checklist, and as I'm budgeting right now, I'm thinking about how to leverage community partners and how to leverage tutoring organizations to target that learning and create as many small groups as possible. So between increasing staffing to reduce ratios, working with both volunteers and contracted tutoring companies, and figuring out a schedule that allows for an intervention block, all of those ways to address learning gaps are top of mind for me as we move into the remainder of this year and next year.
Thanks for those details. And for both of you, if I can ask a follow-up to that, what does the preparation for parents look like? What are you doing to help them, help their children reacclimate to the school setting in an in-person setting?
So from a private business perspective, we've done a lot of communicating with our families as to what this new world will look like. We're very clear when we meet them initially with the expectations that we have and the support that we need. We're also grounded, all of our work is grounded in relationships, and that's a little difficult these days because our families aren't walking their children into classrooms, and that's a struggle for families, for teachers. And so we've created a positive checkpoint every week where our teachers will call the families on the phone and check in. Hey, how are you doing? This is how your child is doing. They're really enjoying this. Or just an opportunity for collaboration between the teacher and the parent, because we don't have that face-to-face interaction that we're so good at and that our work is grounded in. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do with our families. Again, just being very clear and communicating a lot. Whether that be on a phone call, on our website, on our Facebook page. But I think people have dealt with so much uncertainty that the more information you can provide them at the onset of this relationship, the better off they are.
I like the idea of the check-in in the middle of the day. I'm sure it does a lot to allay feelings and anxieties that they may have in just having, their child in a center in the midst of all of this. And Cynthia, did you want to add some on what you were doing with parents and families?
Sure. We start in the summer and have a home visit for every family, ideally before the first day of school, but at a minimum by September. And that relationship building is critical. We go in and we don't talk about academics. We don't judge our families. We say, what are your hopes and dreams? How can we support you? Moving into the school year, I have been very, very intentional about communicating in a wide variety of formats with our families. So every week I send my weekly update, but I've started the practice of recording a 5-minute, 8-minute webinar that shares those same updates, because I'm finding that everyone is so stressed. Everyone has so many responsibilities between working from home, kids, responsibilities, that a long email is just not something they can digest, but a quick video is something they can. And I've gotten good feedback from families that that's a super helpful resource. We also task our mental health clinicians, so the psychologist, the social worker, and that contracted psychologist, to do child development, parenting, mental health sessions, how your child isn't cooperating at home during distance learning, what are some strategies you can use? And that's been a useful resource, and it has helped us to maintain those connections with families as well.
Great, thank you. And let's go back to our participants. Gloria or Liz, is there another question out there that?
Yes, we are getting a bunch of questions. One is, are you requiring staff to receive the COVID-19 vaccine? And if so, how are you addressing that with staff? And also, how are you planning for staff to receive the vaccine?
So the question is around vaccines and how you are working through that with your staff.
So as of Monday in Louisiana, the vaccines we are now eligible. Childcare K through 12 as of Monday. So yesterday. Some of my teachers ran out of work yesterday to go get their vaccines. We are not requiring it. Obviously, it's a small business, so it is voluntary at this point. We are trying to assist any teachers who are interested in getting vaccines, assist them with that in any way we can, whether it's to schedule time off to get them to the nearest pharmacy, however we can. But it is not a requirement in Louisiana for child care centers.
And Cynthia, from a K-12 perspective, is there anything that you were doing in the space around vaccines?
Yeah, luckily our district prioritized teachers getting vaccinated, and so everyone has access who is coming in person. I would say the majority of my teachers took advantage, although it is not required. They were enthusiastic about getting vaccinated. But we're seeing at the school level the same divide we're seeing nationally along socioeconomic and race lines of willingness and trust in the vaccine. So if my custodians and my teaching assistants are a lot less likely to be willing to take the vaccine than my teachers have been. And so I'm engaging them in the same kind of sort of education campaign and building up of trust so that they'll feel more comfortable, so that everyone who's coming to school working with kids is doing so safely.
Great. And Liz,
Right.
Anna?
And oh, go ahead, Amanda.
I was asking for another question.
Yes. How can teachers give emotional support and keep 6 feet apart, especially at drop-off separation?
So in our industry, again, this is birth to 4. Our teachers are not 6 feet apart from our children. We are holding babies. We are close to our 1 and 2-year-olds. It is a little easier with our 3 and 4-year-olds, but our teachers are required to mask at all times. Our children are not required to mask. So a lot of hand washing and other mitigation methods are in place. But if our children need support, as I mentioned earlier on in the webinar, our teachers are providing that sensitivity, that warm hug, that warm embrace to any child that they need to. We've got, again, several mitigation methods in place: clothing, gloves, masks, but if a child needs that support, we are certainly there to give it to them.
Yeah, that I'm finding the same at DCPS, but I will actually add another silver lining and a practice that we will extend post-pandemic. When we invited our 3-year-olds, the first day and week of school for them was unlike the first day for 3-year-olds in my entire career. They walked up to the school, they said bye to their parents, and they went to class. And it was because it was the first day, but they had had so much time building a relationship with the teacher and the other students. And so we thought, my goodness, for now on, every year, the summer is going to have like 10 or so engagements online to continue this when school starts back in person, because we did not see any tears, we did not see any separation anxiety, and it was a first for me in my career.
Great.
All right, another one. What changes do you think need to be made in childcare to build it back better?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So, I think the accountability in Louisiana with the class tool has been a great stepping stone to what childcare needs. Childcare can be very differentiated in respect to lots of small businesses that all sort of do what they think might be best. Class, however, has presented a tool that is research-based, and we know when we provide this rich emotional support to children in an organized environment that we can then begin to dive deeper into instructional support and have children ready socially, emotionally, and academically for kindergarten. So I think increasing sort of that, whether you want to, implement class or different quality measures across the board, every child deserves the best environment, not this group of children or that group of children. Every single child needs this. And I appreciate the class tool, again, because it has that research-based approach. As someone who's been in the field, grown up in this industry, my grandmother, many, many moons ago, Louisiana did not have a quality measure in place. So it wasn't until class presented itself that we had these beautiful tools and this lovely language that we could use across the board, not only within our organization, but with legislators. And it really legitimizes the work we do. So I think by putting a robust accountability system in place, we begin to allow others to see the critical work we do and support the work that is being done every single day.
Yeah, I definitely will agree with you, Paula, on that point about the common language. Given my previous experience in the school system, it's not just the common language, but a common metric and just a way for people to norm and calibrate on what quality looks like, which can then lead to really rich discussions on what next steps are towards continuous improvement, professional development for teachers, for assistants and teacher aides. What does that look like, given the rich data that one receives from the class tool? So I would agree with you on that class plug. Do we have more questions?
We do. Do you feel there will be any barriers in having formal observations as teachers and children adjust to the new norms? I think this question is more for Cynthia.
Barriers to formal observations.
Well, I engaged in 2 today, so they have started. And there are some definite barriers in terms of what you can see. Typically, if I was observing in a classroom, I would look over students' shoulders, maybe even ask them, what are you working on? Which is not as easy to do if you're observing a virtual lesson on Teams or Zoom. And then obviously the in-classroom observation has a fundamental barrier that if I'm observing in many different rooms, I'm a close contact with multiple different cohorts of kids, which basic health and safety protocols would prohibit. That said, I observed in one classroom from the corner of the room and logged into the Teams version of what was happening in person on my phone with my headphones on, and was able to get great data and see a teacher working magic, being both that nurturing presence in the classroom, navigating all kinds of technical challenges seamlessly. And I felt I was able to give her a rating that was accurate and give her feedback that would help her develop. So I'm not in the camp that we should call off all observations. I think that they can still be relevant. I think that they can still be developmental, but I do think we have to be understanding of this very special situation teachers are in and the unique challenges facing them as we're observing them.
Absolutely.
All right. What is your top piece of advice for a leader who is writing their reopening plan?
I would make sure that all protocols in regards to CDC and your Department of Health and Hospitals is in place. As a leader who struggled with when, how do we even reopen, I knew I could not move forward without that, very rich list of here's exactly how you do it. Once I had that information in front of me and the demand to get children back in the classroom and the teachers willing to come back to offer that support for children, I had then positioned myself to open. So without those 3 critical pieces in place, you might want to, just make sure you've got that in place before you then jump into it. But definitely you want the expertise of DHH, your Department of Ed, and then again, the demand and willingness of teachers.
I would build on what Paula said. I agree, but something that has been so helpful to me has been the operational and facilities support of not just the district, but the city. And I would not have been able to get our families to feel confident coming in if I couldn't say we've worked on our HVAC, we have all the PPE we need, we have a HEPA filter in the classroom, and every child has a mask. We will offer them every day. Come on back. That really helped us to build confidence from families who were not feeling that excited about coming in and were very fearful about the health risks. I think the other thing that has been incredibly useful has been the opportunity to have some flexibility in reopening plans. And so we sent our families a survey, asked about their comfort coming in, asked what kind of schedule works for them, and then grade by grade and class by class in some circumstances, we then made very specific plans. So for example, our first grade is our largest cohort and has the largest number of parents who are interested in coming back. And so for that grade level, we did the model where some students come Monday, Tuesday, some students come Thursday, Friday, and it enabled us to reach and meet the demand that was large in that grade level. Our fifth grade is a smaller grade level, many more families not interested, and a group of kids with special needs or who are at risk, who were especially vulnerable during this time. And so for that grade level, we did a model where 11 kids could come in out of the 20 in the class every day, not just 2 days a week, partly because there was less demand and partly because we had a group of learners who needed it most. And that kind of flexibility or willingness to do something different by grade level or by class has made our overall reopening plans much more successful than it would be if it was one size fit all.
Yeah. I would add, I'm not sure if it would be at the top of on my list for reopening, because I definitely concur with Cynthia and Paula on the health and safety pieces, but looking at this as an opportunity to bring in other teachers and leaders in your building and just build leadership capacity. I mean, it's a great opportunity for everyone to put their heads together and collaborate on, what can be done as it relates to reopening. So I would add that I know that in the local public school level, there are advisory councils and instructional support teams, academic leadership teams that, support a principal in his or her execution of the vision for the school. So I would leverage individuals like that. I'm sure the same exists in the private centers. And so I would look to others as thought partners in this work as well. You can't do it alone. So I would say don't overburden yourself with trying to solve all of the problems. Lean on the expertise of others. Let's take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gloria, because I know there are a couple of things that she wants to go over before we end today.
Another question, coming from a policy reform aspect, what would be more suggestions for policymakers after facing this pandemic? Mental health and social and emotional learning, but would you also suggest changes in the way we look at screening, testing, and instruction?
I'm going to chime in first. I don't know if that question was directed towards me, but Cynthia and Paula, please feel free to say more about what you think in terms of policy. I think policymakers really have to listen to the voices on the ground and figure out ways to be attuned and to authentically engage with practitioners like Paula and Cynthia to hear from them firsthand what it is they need. I don't think much needs to change in terms of what we believe makes a difference in the lives of children. Nothing needs to change in general in the social emotional space, right? If you are ascribed to class, for example, you are not saying, let's abandon emotional support, or let's abandon classroom organization, or let's abandon instructional support. those things matter and remain the same, but we can think about how we may do those things differently. But I would say really spending the time to talk to the people on the ground to hear what they have to say before beginning to even think about changing policies would be a good first step. I don't know if Paula or Cynthia had anything to add.
I couldn't agree more, Amanda. And I think the Louisiana Department of Education has done a wonderful job of listening to the people on the ground. I can attest to that as sitting on the steps of the Capitol with the assistant superintendent saying, Paula, what is your special sauce? How do you make it work? You know, and that's just, it was so humbling to me that someone at that level cared about our organization and what mattered. And I think they've done a really good job. I would say that we do have a lot of work to do when it comes to educating our legislators, again, representatives. I think our new national administration has got it. And so I know speaking for Louisiana, we have to educate them more on why this work is so important, and really how it is, you know, again, grounded in a tool that we know works. So I think just around educating some people, some legislators around what it is we do and the importance of it.
And Cynthia, did you have anything to add?
When screening was brought up, what came to mind was all the varied assessments we're using and the reliability and validity of them when they're being done remotely, and has made us as a school leadership team really think about ways we can get good data on how our students are progressing. Looking forward to next year, we've always sort of questioned this notion of age-based cohorts and how it's such a given in American schools, but not the way it's always been, and the value of multi-aged classes. As we think about the different levels kids will be on, we're thinking about that kind of thing. Like, should we take a much more progressive, less orthodox approach to how we group kids and what their day looks like? Should we restructure the day so that it includes time for both acceleration and remediation of skills? Should we not have just a normal 8 to 3 day? Does the day need to be 8 to 5 with the last 2 hours, you know, interest groups or, you know, academic focused remediation groups? And then lastly, this is the last thing anyone's thinking about, but I keep thinking about it, and it's like the importance of those movement opportunities, right? So like recess is the first thing to go, PE is often the next thing to go. And I think we should do the opposite, especially coming out of a time period when kids both physically have been just sitting too much. And we know that kids who face trauma and toxic stress, one of the best ways to get it out is moving your body. And that's a can be directly impacted by policy. DCPS has a policy around number of minutes, and so we have to hire 2 PE teachers to get those numbers. The policy dictated my actions as a school leader, but it directly benefits kids.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Gloria for some closing pieces that we had planned for today, I wanted to thank both of you guys, Paula and Cynthia, not only for joining us here today, but for all that you have done since the start of this pandemic. Can you believe it? It's almost a year, you know, that this thing began, and you know, you have led your entire school community through it all, and have been consistent and, you know, dedicated to ensuring that the needs of all kids are met. So I thank you again for not only being here, but for your efforts on behalf of your communities and the kids and the teachers that serve them. So thank you. Okay, Gloria, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know that there are some slides that we'd like to cover.
Can you see my slide that says building a blueprint for reopening? Yes, okay, great.
Yeah.
So I'd like to share some Teachstone resources that can really help impact your work, especially as you are thinking through reopening. The first one is building a blueprint for reopening. So whether you're writing your transition plan or preparing to return, or you have already returned to in-person learning, you're likely facing a lot of challenges and unknowns. But even in this unprecedented time, we do know that quality teacher-child interactions matter. And now in a time where you are returning to in-person learning after being apart for a few months, or not even a few months, for almost a year, like Amanda said, interactions are even more critical. So we want to be able to partner with you to help you build a plan with a focus on more meaningful interactions, build warm classroom environments that support social emotional development, help you build a high quality and qualified workforce, and then build capacity to ensure equity of interactions across your program. So if you want to learn more, go to our website, www.teachstone.com. And then next, we do have an upcoming webinar, another way to learn more about the solutions that we can offer you and how they will support your program in reopening is joining us for a webinar, a free live webinar, Thursday, March 11th. We will be putting the registration link in the chat box or in the Q&A box, so take a look for that in a second. And we look forward to that, so hopefully we'll see you there soon. And then next is the class learning community. So Teachstone is a company where we really understand the value of bringing educators together in a safe space where they can really learn from each other. So if you want to continue this conversation, for example, the class community is the perfect forum for that. It's free. It allows you to network with other educators, ask questions, share ideas, and really learn from each other. It's really an educator-run space. So in the email that I send you, in the next 24 hours, there will be information to sign up for that. I believe that was also just put in the chat as well if you want to sign up. And then finally, our Interact Leadership Summit is coming up in March. This is our annual summit, but this year it will be virtual. We will be joined by experts and leaders in the field, and our theme this year is building back through interaction. So we'll be talking about social emotional learning, integrating class into your day, building back from COVID impacts, and a whole lot more. And that's going to be March 23rd to 25th. The recordings for all the sessions will be available for you for up to 6 months. And again, the whole thing is virtual. So more information and registration information can be found teachstone.com/interact. I believe that was also just put in the chat as well. And all of this information will be sent to you in the email coming later. So that's all for today. Amanda, Cynthia, Paula, thank you again for your time. And everyone be well and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.